guys, welcome to my channel. My name is ReadingBear and I hope you are ready for some more stories. And today, we'll take a look at some new IDontWorkHereLady content. If you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comment. And now, let's dive right into the stories.
The first story is titled A Tactical Karening. The Karen Gets Karened. I was witness to possibly the most hilarious Karen interaction I've ever seen. In this I was just an onlooker and didn't play a part at all. There are three players in this dialogue. K, the Karen. UC, the nicely dressed but unfortunate customer who Karen decided worked there. And HC, the hilarious customer, who... Well, it'll all become clear. Yesterday in fact. I went to pick up some groceries at Asda, British company, owned by Walmart until February but less trashy. As I'm shopping with my trolley, I hear the harumph of an approaching Karen behind me, but to my surprise she walks straight past me to UC, demanding this, that and the other, to which UC responds with, "Sorry, but I don't work here." As Karen starts accusing him of lying, etc., I figure that I'll stick around and see what happens. It might be funny, but if she assaults the guy or accuses him of something, I'll be a witness. As I'm listening to UC reiterate that he doesn't work for Asda, and Karen repeatedly accuse him of lying, another customer, HC, comes past and addresses the Karen in a big booming voice. Finally, a manager. He booms at her, "Some woman just accused me of not helping her when I'm a customer here. Now, what are you going to do about it?" Oh, the irony. Karen turns to HC and says, "What? I'm not a manager. What do you?" But gets cut off mid-sentence by HC, "Of course you're a manager. I've seen you talking to customers. Now you are going to help me." Karen tries to explain that she was talking to UC who she says works there, but in the confusion, UC had wisely ducked out, leaving Karen saying, "I was talking to." As she gestures at an empty space. Suddenly she is alone. HC, "Well, hanging around speaking to staff isn't very professional, is it? You should be doing your job, helping customers. Starting with me." Karen then just screams, "I don't duck work here. Duck off," and walks off, clearly upset, abandoning her shopping trolley, that's a shopping cart to those who live in the States, in the process. UC, who's been waiting on the next aisle, walks back at this point and speaks. "Ah, she's gone. Yeah, well," says HC, "that got rid of her." Smiles vaguely and just continues shopping like nothing had happened. HC, whoever you are, you're a ducking legend. The next story is titled Karen Can't Understand Basic Kindness. This is a generally wholesome story with a comedic Karen encounter. When I was 17 I worked at McDonald's. Now, the fact that the red and black uniform of McDonald's looks nothing like the blue-centric Walmart uniform has little bearing on this story because as we know the only colors a Karen can see are beneath me and my reflection. So I was visiting Walmart after work, straight out of work. I was still in uniform and my hair was a mess so I still had my McDonald's hat on. I swung by electronics to check out the games and while I was looking at them, there was a pretty young kid like 10 and his mother talking to an employee about what game he wanted to get. I overheard their whole conversation while looking at the games myself. He wanted a Pokemon game but didn't know which one to get. It was between Ruby and Emerald. The kid was clearly into Pokemon but this was his first time getting one of the games because he just got his first Game Boy and he could only get one. His mom clearly had no idea and the employee, a very pleasant older gentleman who didn't know beans about something like Pokemon, were trying to puzzle out the difference between the two games. I loved the kid's enthusiasm and totally understood his anxiety about wanting to get the right one, and since I could see his mother and the employee struggling I went ahead and politely interjected myself. As a big fan of the games I knew an unhealthy amount about them. I explained the general difference between the games and answered his questions about them and he ended up going with Emerald. His biggest concern was making sure he could get a Torchic. After the very relieved adults headed off to the register to check out I was about to leave when an older woman with her husband got my attention and asked, "I need help with the TVs." I responded, "Sorry, I don't really know anything about TVs." "Well, why not? Aren't you expected to?" She huffed back. I realized that in spite of my uniform she thought I was an employee. I laughed and told her, "Sorry, I don't work here, I work for McDonald's." She huffed again and said, "Well, you were helping those people just a minute ago." "Yes, because I knew the answer and was able to help." She snorted, "Well, why would you do that if you don't work here?" I was genuinely baffled by the question and I just looked at her and said, "To be nice? Well, I don't know why you would do something like that." I just stared at her, like how do you even respond to that? After a moment of silence she finally asked, "So can you help me with the TVs or not?" I just said, "No," and walked away. I don't quite understand what about basic human kindness is so confusing, but there it sits. But the little boy got his torchic, and at the end of the day that's what really matters. The next story is titled "I Got Mistaken for a Child Trafficker." Not quite your usual "I don't work here lady" story. Just for a bit of background, I was on a camping trip with a scouting group for people aged 14 to 18. There were about 13 children and 3 adults there if I remember correctly. We had a minibus with a trailer on the back to hold our kit. We had just gotten back from the trip and had arrived at the scout hall to drop off the kit. We formed a sort of conveyor belt system to move stuff around, and I was at the front of the conveyor belt. We were about halfway through moving everything when a man who looked as though he had probably taken every drug known to man on the daily came up to me and grabbed me by the shoulder. Just for context, I'm pretty tall, almost 6 feet, but I am very skinny and I am often mistaken for an adult because of it. He dragged me over and asked me if we were child trafficker, which obviously stunned me. I couldn't process how someone could just assume that. He then asked me again. This time I just told him what? Of course not. He, unlike most people on this subreddit, seemed to get the message for once and apologized. He told us that if we were he probably would have beaten us up. Of course my first thought was why on earth would someone do that, and now my thoughts are r/I am very badass. The next story is titled "Tenant Asking Landlord, Me, to be More Professional." I am a small-time landlord, with just 4 tenants. Earlier this year, I had 2 sisters that didn't respond to my requests to add of the gal's husband to the lease, though he was living with them. Not a big deal. But did I mention the pit bull they also brought home, without permission? I do allow pets, and had previously approved their other dog. I asked nicely in person and by email in the months leading up to the malicious compliance. They also did not respond when I asked if they were happy there, and wanted to renew their lease for the following year. I asked again. Then I emailed them notice that I would start showing the unit 2 days later. I try to be a nice landlord. I do. They had a newborn, as well, so I scheduled all of the showings within a 2-hour window on the same night so I could be in their space as little as possible. Also, because they had not responded, and it was now serious crunch time for getting another tenant and my spouse worked all the following 2 weeks during evening showing hours, I had the delightful inconvenience of bringing my 2- and 6-year-old children with me to the showings. Because I'm not a corporation, I'm a small-time family landlord with kids. Try to imagine how difficult it is to conduct business meetings with 2 kids, right? Then imagine staggering showings every 15 minutes, with prospective tenants who are also bringing their own kids. Just to further clutter your imagination, this is an 800 square foot 2-bedroom apartment with a cozy entryway. So I arrive with my 2 kids, to find that my tenants are still at home, along with the husband, the newborn and the other sister's boyfriend. So that's 7 people in a small kitchen already. Then the first prospective tenants start arriving. Husbands, wives, with kids, and some showing up early, so there's 2 sets of them. That's 14 people in a small kitchen. And I'm a mom. I have magical powers. So I'm holding my toddler. My daughter is safely under the dining table coloring, and I'm chatting with the prospective tenants and directing traffic while my actual tenants prepare to depart. If you didn't know this already, it's common practice in the US to leave the premises during real estate or apartment showings. This was their first apartment, so I actually emailed them ahead of time to let them know what is generally expected at showings, e.g. a relatively tidy apartment, and that they can leave, for their own convenience. They do eventually leave, after the boyfriend tells a prospective tenant that he, in fact, also lives there. And I carry on with an exhausting scheduling of showings. And have my new tenants all picked out and lease signed by the next day. Awesome, right? The next night, I get a voicemail from the husband, who is not my tenant. I saved it. In his voicemail, he told me how awful it was that my children touched his infant's things. They didn't, because I keep my kids entertained with magical mommy toys. But prospective tenants also brought children. And how they had to sterilize everything to keep their infant from being sick. And how inconvenient it was to have showings with only 2 days' notice, and how very unprofessional I was to bring my children, and asked if I could just be more professional in the future. The next morning, I started issuing professional lease violation notices. One for the extra residents of the unit, hubby and boyfriend. one for the extra dog, and a few additional ones for building concerns I noted during the showings. They ignored the violation notice, which I sent by certified mail and, thoughtfully, also by email. I decided to be even more professional 30 days later, and issue a 5-day notice to vacate. And I called their mom, who is their emergency contact, as an eviction notice as an emergency. Did I mention that their lease was due to end just a few weeks later? But it would be unprofessional of me to let these violations slide until then. 3 days later, they'd magically sent me all the information I'd requested, removed the other dog, licensed the first dog, gotten the required pet insurance. They moved out on their lease termination date, and skipped out on their last electric bill, and left the unit in damaged condition. Despite my professional security deposit disposition statement and request for payment, they ignored those notices, until I stated I would proceed to small claims court by X date for the total due beyond their security deposit. On X date, they replied stating they didn't think it was fair that they should have to cover damages to the unit, or pay any more money toward their utility bill. Yep. 2 months later, there we were in the lobby of the courthouse, sitting across from each other on uncomfortable waiting room benches. They're laughing among themselves about how they're going to get their full security deposit back. And I'm quietly reviewing my presentation notes to the judge and my sizable stack of evidence, photographs, videos. This was my first time in court, but I wasn't laughing. I was preparing. 1 hour later, we're back in the lobby and their mom is trying to write me a check for the full amount of the judgment. She doesn't have a pen. Her kids don't have a pen. I, however, have a pen. I cheerfully offer my pen. She writes the check and hands it to me, and wait. I hold out my hand again. Got my pen back too. I was so proud of myself for not saying any of the sassy things in my head in that moment. You know why? Because I was being professional, as I'd been from the moment he'd left that voicemail. As a last note, I do acknowledge that it would have been better if I hadn't brought my children. However, if you have kids, you'll understand that sometimes, they simply have to go where you go. The next story is titled Hangry Family Threatens to Leave Bad Yelp Review. So this is gonna be a short story. It was a couple months ago when I was on my lunch break and I decided to go eat at this Hawaiian barbecue place in the same plaza as my workplace. I'm sitting there eating my food when a family walks in and stands at the cashier stand. The cashier was in the back. There's a bell to call them. So the father starts tapping his feet in that annoying I'm waiting sort of way while looking at me. I am kind of unconfrontational, so I look down and keep eating. Then he says service here is terrible. I'm gonna yelp that employees here ignore customers when they enter. Well, now I have to speak up because I don't want that place to get overrun with bad reviews if I can't help it. So I go, you know I don't work here, right? Dude suddenly turns 180 and starts apologizing. And says the one thing I'll never forget. He said you're lucky cuz I was close to throwing your food in your face. He said it in a joking way, but I wouldn't put it past him. So I tell him to ring the bell and finish my food and leave. I go back to work and an hour later I see them in my store and hurried to a different area to avoid them. The next story is titled I Almost Went to Customer Service and Asked Where I Should Send an Invoice for My Labor. Last week I was working on my kitchen. Long story short, this was a 4th out of 6 trips I would be making trying to find plumbing fittings that worked with my house. I am wearing old jeans and a really old Oscar the Grouch shirt. They both have paint, and whatever else collects on sacrificial work clothes. It's 8:30 p.m. and I'm in the plumbing section of a large hardware store, the blue one not the orange one, looking at fitting when an older couple with a small section of hose walk up and start looking at the wall of fittings. They look for a few minutes and eventually the guy looks at me and asks so I'm trying to. What do you recommend? I looked up like Jim from The Office thinking to myself, what? Me? Dude, I'm trying to figure this stuff out too. By sheer happenstance I had done what he was trying to do and said he needed to go to Lawn and Garden on the other side of the building and they sell hose repair, extension kit and it's super easy. I explained the process and he left that aisle. I turned to leave when another guy hearing our conversation had a plumbing fitting in his hand started right in with his issue. He explained what he was doing and sure enough it was going to take 2 parts but I pointed them out and showed him the stuff. He said thanks and I started down the aisle. But a third person shouted out, hey, I have a question too. All I could think was where are all the employees? I came back and said I don't work here to the lady and she said oh, but you're answering questions. I let her know I was just trying to be helpful. Not even kidding, she just asks away. Funny thing is she is looking for a new refrigerator water line. She was standing next to them, they were labeled ice maker waterline. I asked those? And pointed. After a few embarrassed thank yous I left. I helped 3 customers at a store I don't work at. I was really close to asking a manager, what would you say you do here? It's frustrating that these stores staff so far down that customers get desperate enough to ask complete strangers. The next story is titled, Ma'am, I don't get to decide what the uniform looks like. This happened several years ago when I was 18. I worked in the kitchen at chain diner. The uniform is a short-sleeve white Oxford shirt, a black bow tie, and black apron. My dad texted me asking me to stop by the pet store and get some dog food on my way home. No problem. I go inside, in my uniform, name tag, my hair in a very tight bun still in a hairnet. I'm looking at the dog food, trying to find the right brand. A woman comes down the aisle and asks me where is the organic dog food. I said, I don't know, I'm sorry. She then stares at me for a solid 15 seconds. I can feel it as I'm looking over the dog food. She says, don't you work here? I laughed and said, oh. No, I work at restaurant. I thought it was a funny mishap, no harm no foul. She doesn't laugh though, she just says you're wearing a name tag. I looked down and unpinned my name tag, showing her the restaurant's logo. Yeah, sorry, just got off work. She is like, really boiling under the surface. Well, maybe you shouldn't wear such confusing clothes. I didn't know what to say, so I just picked up my dog food and went to the counter. I overheard her complaining to the next cashier about me. The cashier didn't know what to say either. I left before she talked to anyone else. Her seething anger was beyond confusing. The next story is titled, Lady Insists I Open a Business I Don't Work For. Okay, as I stated in another post, the store I managed was connected to a McDonald's. One holiday, when they were closed, I happened to be working, not happily, as I was supposed to be off holidays, but someone called in, so. I'm busy stocking some items when I hear it, the huff of a wild Karen, preparing to work itself into a tizzy. Excuse me, there is supposed to be a red box in this location, keep in mind, I'm not in the best of moods already, and this was said in the snottiest tone imaginable. Keeping a incredibly strained smile on my face, I tell her, yes, there is one over in the McDonald's. Here is where I committed my cardinal sin. Not usually working on the holidays, I had the audacity to forget that they weren't open today. Q idiot mode level 9000, obviously, since it's not in here. Could you go open the door so I can return my video? Now fully cognizant of the issue, I take a deep mental breath, and tell her, I'm sorry. No, I don't have keys to their doors, they are a separate business. Initiate hypersonic Karen screech, bullcrap, you are obviously employed by the same company, you are in the same damn building. Further attempts at reasonably explaining this is not the case fall on deaf ears. At some point I have to take a break from trying to translate logic into crazy to check out a customer. At this point Karen tells me, you can ignore me all you like, I am not leaving until you help me. Being a helpful sort of fellow, I nod amiably, and begin to write on a piece of paper, handing it to her after I finish. What the hell is this? Well, you said you wouldn't leave until I helped you. Given your complete lack of ability to listen to reason, I have figured out your true problem, and I am trying to help. That is directions to Center Point Hospital. They are great at dealing with mental illness or substance abuse, whichever your issue is. At this point Karen lets out a screech like you know, I don't think anything in nature has ever made a sound like that. I want to speak to your manager. Okay, let me go get him. I walk into the back room, walk back out again, and say, what seems to be the problem? She is now sputtering incoherently, and storms out the door, spewing invectives, and what I can only presume were threats to contact corporate to get me fired. Bye, Karen. Do come again. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe to the channel and post some bear emojis in the comments.